So earlier this week, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said, quote, the U.S. is expected to reach the highest number of people apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border in 2 decades. President Biden responded to that surge in an interview with George Stephanopoulos. Here's what he had to say.
A lot of the migrants coming in saying they're coming in because you promised to make things better. It seems to be getting worse by the day. Was it a mistake not to anticipate this surge?
Well, first of all, there was a surge the last 2 years, in 19 and 20, there was a surge as well.
This one might be worse.
No, well, it could be, but here's the deal. We're sending back people to, first of all, the idea that Joe Biden said come, because I heard the other day that they're coming because they know I'm a nice guy and I won't do what Trump did.
They're saying this.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. They're not.
Do you have to say quite clearly, don't come?
Yes. I can say quite clearly, don't come. And what we're in the process of getting set up, don't leave your town or city or community.
Here to discuss the crisis and how the Biden administration is handling the border is journalist and author of Blood, Gun, Money, How America Arms Gangs and Cartels, Ioan Grillo. Ioan, thanks so much for joining the show. We really appreciate it.
Great to see you, Ioan.
Yeah, great to be here.
So to break down a little bit of the situation for us, it gets very complicated in terms of the drivers of the crisis, why exactly this is happening right now, and then what are the main points of contention? What do you think, Ioan?
Well, I mean, I've been covering this region for 20 years and covering particularly Central America over the last decade and seen the real meltdown that's happened in Honduras particularly. And so you've seen this crisis come up again and again. I mean, 2014, there was a child migrant crisis on the border under Obama. That was shut down partly by giving a lot of money to the Central American countries and Mexico to cut the tide of the migrants. In 2018, then we saw this much bigger crisis blow up that we know about. And things were really cut down a bit because of how President Trump kind of handled in this very aggressive way, but also because of the pandemic. And it was funny seeing the interview with President Biden there. I mean, journalists here, we all knew something was going to happen pretty soon.
And Ioan, so tell us about what are the actual differences in the Biden administration's policies at the border versus what the Trump administration was doing?
So under Trump, they did some quite extreme things to try and turn this around. One thing was saying that there's a big rise in people claiming asylum in the United States because they're fleeing violence. Now, many of these people that you look at in Honduras, in El Salvador, they are fleeing very violent predatory situations that they're fleeing from. And the numbers were really rocketing, and this was causing a big problem because people were going to the United States and the numbers of people applying for asylum was reaching hundreds of thousands. So one of the things that the Trump administration did was to say people had to wait in Mexico while they applied for asylum. So you saw these big refugee camps emerging on the border with very, very bad conditions, and then a lot of crime against them happening in Mexico. So what Biden did was President Biden said, we're not going to have this, we're going to allow people to come into Mexico. But now you've got this big queue of people on the border waiting to try and get in little by little. And there's a lot of confusion about the other things. Some people thought, well, because they were being let in over the asylum applications, doesn't mean they're going to be let in if they're going in and trying to kind of go in between the posts and sneak in between the border. So you still have people being thrown out there. Mexico's policy is also very, very confusing. So you see this really, really confusing situation happening in the border cities right now.
Yeah, this is the part I don't really understand, Ioan, because as I understand it, remain in Mexico, that was what the mainstream policy was. What does the Mexican government think about this as well? Because I know that they have tried very hard in order to stop migrants from coming across their border because they didn't want to deal with it. How does AMLO and many of the other politicians feel in Mexico with respect to this?
So when AMLO first came to power, he had this kind of saying, well, we'll welcome Central Americans. They can come in. We can give them work and support, and we can also support them in their home countries. When we saw that surge in 2019 and the numbers really reaching high levels, then and also the pressure from the Trump administration, AMLO really turned around on this and used this National Guard, this new militarized police force, to really turn back migrants as they came through. Now you've got, I think, a more ambiguous stance by the administration in Mexico. There hasn't been the pressure yet, and they are, in a sense, Mexico's in a very strong bargaining position with the United States of being able to say, well, what can you give us if we use force to try and turn back migrants? Now, within Mexico, there is mixed opinion here. There are people who say this is very bad to see Mexico using force to effectively police the border for the United States. But there are other people here who also aren't happy about very large numbers of undocumented Central Americans passing through the country. Now, the actual remain in Mexico thing is also confusing because, I mean, Mexico, in my opinion, should not have allowed the United States to say it was going to throw out an undocumented migrant from a third country into Mexico. It'd be like if in the UK, it was allowing France to eject an undocumented migrant into the UK. But Mexico did allow this. Now it's kind of turning back, saying we're not going to allow this anymore. But on the border area, it's very confusing. And I was just talking to somebody yesterday saying people are literally being thrown out into the kind of gap, no man's land between Mexico and the United States and just walking into Mexico.
Wow. And Ioan, can you just talk us through what do you see as the primary drivers of this surge right now? One of the things that you'd mentioned is the conditions in some of the Central American countries that a lot of migrants are coming from. Is that one of the significant factors in addition to the change in Biden administration policies?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you look at Honduras, and the largest numbers specifically have been from Honduras, then you've seen a real meltdown in the country over the last decade. It became the most murderous country in the world in 2012. You know, when I've been seeing it go down, deteriorate before then. When I was down there then, I saw the biggest prison fire in world history with 360 people who died.
Right.
I mean, horrific massacres and shootouts happening. Now, the number of bodies dropping has gone down since then, supposedly. But still, I was just talking to colleagues there yesterday and people I know there yesterday, and the situation is still very, very bad. There's also a lot of the crime of things like extortion from gang members. And so people lose businesses and just very, very desperate situations. I mean, when you saw people go on the migrant caravans, they would sometimes see these things happening on TV and literally just leave everything and go on them because they just could not pay their bills. So you've seen like people really on the edge and a very, very corrupt administration. And right now we've got a court case in New York with a drug trafficker who's saying that the president of Honduras is involved in drug trafficking. So there's kind of combination of factors there and very, very bad situation.
Yeah, and Ioan, as I understand it, we could solve this all tomorrow if Mexico were to sign a safe third country agreement, something that we have with Canada, which is that you can't pass through the United States in order to try and get asylum in Canada. Why is that not happening? Are the Mexicans resistant to it? Is it a UN thing? Is the Biden administration not pursuing all of this? What's going on there?
Well, there's not there's a lot of, I think, within people who look at migration, there's not a great amount of support for that. That would mean that anybody fleeing Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador who just stepped in the Mexican border would have to apply for asylum here. It's not a particularly safe place for a lot of people to apply for asylum for. Some of the same gangs that operate in Central America that are seeking people out are also operating here. There was one journalist who fled Honduras who was murdered in Veracruz. If you look at a lot of the cities, big cities like Tijuana right now, where a lot of the migrants and refugees were waiting, that is like in the numbers now one of the most violent cities in the world. So it's not really a great place or safe place for people to seek asylum. There is also the issue that, I mean, the reality is that many people leaving Honduras, El Salvador, have family members in the United States and have job opportunities in the United States that they don't have here. So there's also a big economic factor very, very much mixed in with this.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And finally, one of the stickiest problems to deal with is the number of unaccompanied minors and children who are at the border, and their handling. Joe Biden has come in for criticism from the left in the conditions that they're being detained in, something obviously that Donald Trump was heavily criticized during his administration for. What's the reality of the conditions that they're facing? What's the difference between the Biden administration's approach and the Trump administration's approach? And do you have some sense of what would make sense and be legal based on current law?
So children or minors under 18 being in detention, that was already a big deal under Obama. And there was photos that came out of this air base in Texas that there was a very large amount of teenagers who were being held in under the Obama administration. What the Trump administration did a lot was the separation of children and parents. And that was what caused a lot of the controversy. And that was a very, very harsh tactic. I think now what's come back is this idea of minors being held again. And there's not an easy solution to this. I mean, one thing is which they do is to say, well, we find if they have family in the United States, friends in the United States, and after they're held for a certain amount of time, they can be released into those, into the communities, those people. I have talked to people who have been through that process and do say that, they do consider that again, that they're going to get in, be held, and then be released to the community, be with the family when they're 15, 16, 17. And that is in a better situation than they are in Honduras and El Salvador. But also there's many cases of them who are generally fleeing for their lives, and people that are subject to being recruited or being targeted by gang members. And as I look at it in my new book, there's a big investigation into how the guns are being trafficked, often from the United States, to these gangs and cartels who are behind this violence.
Yeah, that's a whole other part of the story. Ioan, really great talking to you.
Yeah.
Breaking down a very complicated situation. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and everybody should get the book, Blood, Gun, Money.
Right.
Great to see you, Ioan.
Great to be here. All the best there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. A lot more rising for you after this.